taking the time to come and to have a conversation about standards-based grading and also anything else that you'd like to have a conversation on. This is Cody Holt, and I am Jeanette Ward, and this is our town hall, our first town hall for School District U-46 as board members. But tonight we have a special speaker. Her name is Jill Alexander. Also, before I begin that, I wanted to make sure everyone knows, I think I told most people, but this event is being recorded for the benefit of those who couldn't make it tonight, and it will be posted on YouTube. So again, this is Jill Alexander. She has a BS in biology, a minor in chemistry from the University of Illinois at Urbana. She has her master's in education, in curriculum and instruction from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And she also has 30 additional hours in instructional technology from Augustana College. She's was a science teacher at Argo Community High School for 22 years, and she's head of the science department at Argo High School since 2003. She currently teaches chemistry and physics, and chemistry part is near and dear to my heart, because I have a chemistry background and work for a chemical company. She's the mother of 4 boys, one of which is here. His name is Drew. And they're 16, 14, 10, and 9. Her oldest son attends Morton West High School in Berwyn, which recently implemented standards-based grading. She is the founder of Morton Parents Against Sinking Standards. It's called Morton PASS. You can find it if you Google it. And she is a member of a committee to examine grading practices at the K-8 district in Berwyn, and that's Berwyn South School District 100. And just a word before she begins, I've heard some commentary that are we also going to have a presentation in favor of standards-based grading. And what I would like to respond to that is that the presentations in favor of standards-based grading are available on the public website of U-46, and you can look them up there. There has been extensive presentations in favor of standards-based grading given at the board meetings. This is an opportunity to look at a different view. So without further ado, here is Jill.
I really appreciate being invited here tonight. Can you hear me if I don't use the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a big loud teacher voice, so if it's just as well, I'd rather just keep my hands free so I can wave or something. So as Jeanette mentioned, you know, this is who I am, but I think it's also important to tell you who I'm not. I am not an expert on standards-based grading. I am not one of those hired guns that comes in as a consultant and charges a lot of money to talk about something that I know. I'm just a person who's in the trenches, somebody who has a little bit of understanding of education because I've been in it for a long time, but also I have the benefit of being a parent who's seeing it from the side of my own child going through this implementation of standards-based grading. So I don't want anyone to think, you know, she's some guru and, you know, proclaiming to be some expert. I am not an expert, but I do have experience from a variety of viewpoints. Another thing that I want to say, and I often get this when I say, you know, there's problems with standards-based grading, I get a lot of, well, you know, change is hard. If, you know, people are afraid of change. I'm not afraid of change. I'm a rather progressive person as a teacher, as an administrator. I'm the one who's responsible for making changes in my own department, sometimes unpopular ones. So that's not something that I shy away from, and that's not really the issue here. I'm not old-fashioned. I'm not one of those old people who's like, in my day, this is how we used to do it. We should keep on doing it like that forever. That's not me either. I've also heard people say, well, you know, you're one of those teachers who likes to punish kids with grades. You know, you like to give a lot of zeros so that, you know, you're tough on kids and you're trying to punish them with a certain grade that you give them. And that's not the case. I teach some of the most struggling learners in our building. This year I have a co-teaching assignment. I have the kids who are, you know, the most likely to be dropouts in our district. They are the kids who struggle with everything. And I teach them because I want to teach them, not because someone made me do it, not because that was an assignment given to me. I take on that responsibility because I like those kids and they need committed people who are going to help them. And I think that's me. And I'm not just interested in what's good for my own child. There's been people who say, well, you know, you want to make other kids look bad so that your own child looks good, and that is not the case. My son has 2 parents who are both teachers. He gets a lot of support at home. He looks good because he's a great kid and he works hard, not because other kids in his class do badly. So I just kind of wanted to get those things out there because I think that's just as important to say as who I am as who I'm not. For those of you who are not familiar with standards-based grading, I know there's people in the room who come from a variety of backgrounds of familiarity with this topic. This is one of those things that's been around for a while. This is not necessarily a new idea. It's championed by some of these big names in education. If you're an educator, you've probably heard of Robert Marzano, Rick Wormelli, Doug Reeves, who, by the way, was a consultant for District 100, where my younger children go to school, and Thomas Gusky, who was a hired consultant for District 201, where my older son is going to high school. So these are people whose names get bandied about a lot in the educational communities. These are the people who are kind of putting forth this idea. The idea, when you hear it on paper, it sounds really good. There's things that it's hard to argue with. So when they say, you know, we want to focus on mastery of standards, not just points. I don't think there's a parent out there who doesn't want their kid to learn the standards. I don't think there's a parent out there who doesn't want the grading system to be fair to their kids. There's a very strong focus on assessments rather than homework. I've heard people say, well, you know, you don't win practice, you win games. And so homework is really that practice. You do it, and you don't necessarily want a kid to be punished if they take several opportunities or tries to be able to learn something. Again, that doesn't sound unreasonable. That sounds like something that any parent or even student could get behind. Oftentimes with standard-based grading, you'll see that they use a numeric scale. At Morton, they use a 0 to 5 scale. I understand that in U-46, it's been a 1 to 4, is that correct? Yeah. So, you know, it just kind of depends on the different schools. My younger sons go to the elementary district. They're using a 5 to 10 scale, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. I should also add that there's a lot of different ways to do standards-based grading. There is no one kind of standard way to do it. Some schools will just take an average of the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s that the kids get. At my son's school, they take what's called a weighted average. So for example, writing scores are worth 40% of the grade. They'll average up all of the grades in writing, and then that will be 40% of their grade. Then they'll average up all the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s for reading, and that'll be 20% of their grade. So they use kind of a weighted system, but it's an average. Other districts I know have done things like they'll take the most recent score. So they'll say, well, a kid might take a long time to develop this skill, and so it's really not fair to punish them if, when they're starting out, that they still don't know it. What we really are interested in is what do they know when they get to the end. So we're only going to grade them on what they did most recently. Other schools will take a mode. They'll say, okay, well, this kid has had lots of opportunities to show us. We're going to take the most frequent score that they got, and that's what we're going to give them. So it really just depends on the district. It depends on, you know, how they decide that it works best for them with their grading system, with their students, but there is no necessarily one way. Today I want to spend a little bit of time just talking to you about how it was rolled out at my son's school and some of the problems that we saw right off the bat. And I think when you hear some of the things that we see, you may recognize some of those problems as well as things that have happened in U-46. So maybe you've heard some of these phrases before. Standards-based grading is going to do a better job of reporting what a student knows and can do. Once again, nobody's going to argue with that. We want to know what our kids can do. We want to know where they're strong. We want to know where they're weak, and we want to know where we can help them. And more importantly, we want the kids to know that. So that doesn't sound like necessarily a bad idea. I've also heard this one, that giving a 0 for missing work is unfair. You know, philosophically, there may be people on different sides of the fence on this one. I've also heard a student's effort should not factor into their grade. Again, could be some philosophical differences on this one. Homework is practice and shouldn't be counted in the grade. You know, there's some merit to that as well. That is, if a student is trying to learn something, we don't necessarily want to punish them if they fall down the first couple times. When a kid's riding a bike, you don't get mad if they fall off the first couple times, but you want them to continue to try. You want them to continue to put forth the effort so that they do learn it. I've heard this one a lot, that if a student gets an 82% or if a student gets a B on a test, we don't really know what that means. What does a B really mean? We don't really know if that kid learned something. This is one that I get a lot too, is that kids are getting good grades because they're compliant, because they know what a teacher wants from them, and they're good at playing school. I don't know, to me, I find that a little bit insulting. You know, as a parent of a child who is a high achiever, I also have a child who is a struggling learner. My youngest son is adopted. He came to us with a lot of learning problems, with physical disabilities. And so, you know, this idea that a kid only does well in school because they do what the teacher wants, I find that a little bit insulting. This one's my favorite, and I've heard this so many times, that kids get good grades because they get extra credit for bringing in Kleenex. To me, that is the biggest straw man argument you could make. You know, something this ridiculous. If I knew that there were a teacher in my department who was giving kids points in the grade book for wearing school colors on Friday, or for going to the homecoming game, or for bringing in tissues, I would tell them to stop it. Because that's not necessarily a practice that we want to encourage, nor does it tell us much about what that kid is learning. So a little bit about where I'm from, or where my child is from. I don't teach in the district where he goes to school. I teach in a neighboring district about 3 miles south. But J. Sterling Morton High School has 4 schools. There's an alternative school. There's Morton East, which is in Cicero. There's Morton West, which is in Berwyn. And then there's a freshman center. Because it's such a large district, they split up the Cicero campus, and they now have a freshman center that houses only 9th graders. So it is a very, very large district, largely Hispanic. As a matter of fact, it is the largest Hispanic district in the state of Illinois. Interestingly, what we found between the year 2010 and 2013, our graduation rate dropped like a rock. It went from 82% of our students graduating, which was pretty close to the state average, down to 69%. So only about 2/3 of the students are graduating in 4 years, and that happened in a matter of just 3 years. And for those of you who are not familiar with educational statistics, that is significant, very significant. And we know why that is. There were budgetary problems in the district. The school could not afford certain programs, and so they cut back on graduation requirements. Students are now only allowed to take 20 credits, and they must pass all 20 in order to graduate. There is no room anywhere for a student not to be successful in a class. And there is no room in their schedule, if they aren't successful, to retake that class during the school year. It has to be done over the summer, or it has to be done at night school at additional cost to the students. And when you consider that a large percentage of the population in this particular district is low income, many of the families cannot afford to pay for a summer school class, and so their kids simply don't graduate in 4 years. And that's what happened over the course of those 3. So in the fall of 2013, it just happened to be Andrew's freshman year, the district implemented standards-based grading. And they said, you know, this is going to be great. We're going to do a better job of measuring what kids know and can do. And this is really going to give better feedback to parents. And once again, you know, what parent is going to argue with that? You know, we want that. So Argo's scheme looks something like this, and it's very similar, I think, to what's going on here at U-46. We're using a 5-point scale. And you can see that there's these equal intervals in between. So there's not large gaps between, you know, 0 to 0.9 we don't give Fs, they give Bs, I don't know why. But my husband, who's a math teacher, when he first saw this, he said, you know, this business of using a 5-point scale, if you're passing kids with a 1 out of a 5, you're really passing them with a 20%. Because that's what, you know, 1 divided by 5 is 20%. So we made an appointment to sit down with the principal and the assistant superintendent, and we said, could you please explain this to us? Because as career educators, we've never seen anything like this, and we're a little bit skeptical about this, you know, 20% business. And we were assured. They said, no, don't worry about it. It's not a 20%. We haven't dropped the standards. These are performance indicators. You got to stop thinking about percents. Percents don't happen anymore. We're not using percents anymore. This is really going to tell you more about what your kid knows and can do. And so we left that meeting and we said, all right, we'll give you a semester and we'll just kind of see how it goes with our child. We'll see if it is in fact what you say it is, that this is not a dropping of the standards, or if it is. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do standards-based grading, and one of the things that always kind of pops its head in there is this idea of using that numeric 1 to 5 or 1 to 4 scale. And the reason they do that is, the argument is, it's more fair to the kids. So if you look on the left, that's kind of a traditional grading scale. And everybody says, oh, look at that, look, there's so much room for a kid to fail. There's 59 ways a kid can fail, and it's only, 10-point ranges for a B, C, D, and, a passing grade. And so that's not fair. Why should you have to give a 20% to a kid or a 25% when, an F is an F? So there's other ways that they do it. So the first bar there, that's Morton, where you've got, your A with a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The second one is what's being done at my son's middle school. My 8th grader came home back in September and he said, hey Ma, if I don't do my science homework, I still get 5 out of 10 points. All my homework is worth 10, and all my tests are worth 10, and even if I don't do them, I still get half credit. But if you look mathematically, they are really the same thing. 0 to 5, 5 to 10, doesn't matter, it's 5 divisions. The one on the right is what my husband and I are kind of scratching our heads suspecting is happening at Morton. We're suspecting that they have divided it from 80, 60, 40, and 20 being the lowest for your passing grade. So again, the administration said, no, that's not what's going on. We haven't really lowered the bar, but we're just kind of looking at it going, maybe, maybe not. So this is what my son's grades look like. We use not Infinite Campus, which I think is what you guys use. We use Skyward, which is another kind of typical grading system. This is what it looks like on the app. And if you just look, this is his English class. The one thing that you'll notice is it's very hard to tell which assignments are important. Because when every grade is on a scale of 1 to 5, you can't tell. Was it a test? Was it really important? Was this just a little practice they did in class? Was this like a one-day thing or a one-month thing? You can't tell just by looking at those numbers. And what else is going on here is that there are hidden weights that parents don't see. Because in reality, tests are not weighted the way homeworks are. Tests are weighted much more. But when you look in the grade book, you can't see it. And you don't know. The other thing is, can you tell just from this what my kid knows and can do? Because I can't. And if I ask my kid, he gives me the shrug. He doesn't know either. So, some of the rhetoric that sounded great at first, when we started seeing it in practice, we're finding ourselves having to email and pick up the phone all the time to ask the teacher, what the heck is this? The other thing I should point out is that, as I said before, they're using a weighted average. So writing is an important part of the English class. It's worth 40%. There's a lot of grades under writing. But there's also language, which I would imagine is probably grammar. There's speaking and listening. There's reading different kinds of texts, fiction and nonfiction. And you can see where the teacher has spent her time in the class. She spent a lot of time on writing. She spent a lot of time on fiction reading, not so much on nonfiction reading, and definitely not a lot on language and speaking and listening. But because she only had one assignment in each of those categories, that little vocabulary assignment that he did back in October is worth the same as his final exam. Just because of the way it worked out. This was another thing that my husband and I took issue with when we saw this at the district, is they said, well, here's our proficiency scale. Here's what a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 means. I know it might be difficult to read from the back there, but that last one where it says needs improvement, a 1, it says a student provides responses that indicate a distinct lack of understanding of the knowledge. However, with help, the student demonstrates partial understanding of some of the knowledge. That's a passing grade. A distinct lack of understanding. That's passing. I have a problem with that. I don't think that's right. Oops, back up a step here. If you look at what it takes for a kid to fail, student provides no response. That's what it takes to fail. And again, as a parent and a taxpayer and somebody who cares a whole lot about education, this is not what I want for my schools. So after sitting through that first semester and just kind of saying, you know what, we'll take it at face value and we'll just kind of see what you have going on here. You said we're not lowering standards, fine. Let's do one semester and then we'll kind of collect some data at the end of the first semester. So we put in a Freedom of Information request for grade distributions at the end of first semester, and here are some of the things that we found. These are, I just picked a couple, there's a whole bunch of them, but here's a typical biology class. There are 2 campuses where biology is taught, that's a freshman class. It's taught at the Morton West, which is the blue line, and that's also taught at the Freshman Center in Cicero. And if you see, we typically had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10% of the kids not earning credit over the past 3 years. Suddenly, in the year that they implemented standards-based grading, it was down to about 2% of students failing. And if you ask an administrator, they say, isn't that great? We want kids to do well. This is phenomenal. But what they didn't tell you is there's been no change to the curriculum, no change to the teaching practices, no changes to professional learning communities. Same thing in world history, same thing in health, same thing in algebra. We see this dramatic drop in kids' failure rates. And I want to say once again, I am not a punitive person who wants to, let's just fail these kids. That's not what we're about. But if a kid earns credit, we want to make sure that they know something. We want to make sure that they earned their credit and they didn't have a distinct lack of understanding. We want kids to be able to walk away and do something with their education and get something out of it. So this, to me, was a little bit disturbing. But again, it's not necessarily proof that standards-based grading did that. It is, you know, in science we have this phrase, we say correlation does not imply causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. So we went a step further. Oh, I also had teachers talking in my ear at this time. So my husband and I and my son and some of his friends and some other parents started coming to board meetings, as I know has been happening here in U-46, and addressing the board and saying, hey, we've got a problem with this. And so I'd get teachers coming up to me and tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you know, don't use my name, but I want to tell you something that's going on. Here's a particular student that was driving this particular teacher crazy. Kid had 38 missing assignments, including tests and quizzes, you know, big stuff. The kid failed the final, did not come to school very much during the last 5 weeks, and failed the majority of the tests. And if you want to take a guess what grade that kid got, they passed with a D. And it wasn't even close. The kid passed easily with a D. And this teacher said, this is not what was happening in my classroom a semester ago. A kid that had this kind of an academic history would not be passing a class, nor do they deserve to pass the class, because they haven't demonstrated to me that they know what they should. But this is how it's going now. So, again, you know, we have anecdotal evidence from teachers, and we have, you know, the grade distributions would seem to suggest that something very drastic happened in just a matter of one semester. So what my husband and I did is what any good scientist does, is we made a hypothesis and we tested it. So I happen to have a really good friend who's, I'm going to skip out of this here for just a second. I have a good friend who is phenomenal at writing Excel spreadsheets. And I said, you know what, I want to test my hypothesis. I think that Morton is passing kids with a 20%. Let's mock up a grade book and see if we can test and see if that's true. So what he did is he created this Excel spreadsheet. Basically what it is, it's like a little fake grade book. It has all of my son's assignments. He'll be very happy that I'm posting his grades for the world to see here, but these are his English grades from last semester, or last year. So on the left we have all the assignments. It tells what kind of assignment it is, because there's a difference between whether it was a test or a practice, summative versus formative. At this point in time, summative assessments, tests, and big projects were worth 90% of the kids' grade. Homework was only worth 10%. And then the teachers had the ability to put in these little weight multipliers if they wanted to make a test worth a little bit more. So if you look up in the top right corner, up there in that red box, he had a 3.7 in the class. These are all his grades for the entire semester. So, and I knew that my assumption was correct, because once I typed in all his grades in my little fake grade book, they matched perfectly with what was on Skyward, which is his official grade book. So I knew when we said, you know, Morton is using this scale of 80, 60, 40, 20 for the grade cut scores, that's what I used in my fake grade book. It predicted perfectly what he was getting in his real classes. So I knew I was right. But here's what's even worse. If you go through and you start putting in zeros, I'm just going to go down this entire category here, and I'm going to start putting in zeros. And if you watch that grade up in the top right corner, this is the entire first unit of study, which is reading literature. This is all his nonfiction reading. I'm sorry, all his fictional reading, Shakespeare and whatnot. Even if he hadn't done that entire unit of study, he'd still have a B. Let's keep going. Here's the next one. This is his nonfiction reading. I'm going to go through and I'm going to put in a 0 for every single one of these 2. You can see his grades dropping. Now he's down to a C. Keep going. Now I'm down here in this big category. This is writing. If you remember, it's 40% of the grade. If a kid is smart, and believe me, high school kids are plenty smart, they know that they probably can't skip everything, but you could definitely skip all the homework. You can probably skip most of the summative assessments, which I am going to do right now. Let's say I do maybe 2 of them. I've skipped pretty much everything in that category except for 2 writing assignments, and I'm still passing with a C. Keep going. Here's language, so this is all his grammar. Nothing, 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 nothing. Still passing with a C. Now we're down to speaking. Don't have to do that either. And now, okay, he's finally slipped to a D. Now we're down to the final exam. What do you suppose he has to do on the final exam? If he doesn't sit for the final, he still passes with a D. So there are exactly 2 assignments that he had to do for the entire semester. Not that he did that, because I'd kill him. But there were 2 assignments that he had to do for the entire semester, and he could redo them as many times as he wanted, and he would pass. That's what they had going on. And still, when I pointed this out to the administration, they still denied that this was a problem. They said, this isn't a problem. It's not really happening. So, you know, we've got big issues there. So then it just, around that time, you know, speaking to the board a lot, meeting with frustration, a lot of denial from the administration that there's even anything wrong with this system. I happened to go to a PTO meeting, and I sat down next to some very nice kids. And typically kids don't go to PTO meetings. In most cases, parents don't go to PTO meetings because they're dry, let's be honest. But there were 7 kids there that night, and they said, we're here tonight because we need your help. We are having problems with this new grading system. We have spoken to the principal. We have asked to speak to the assistant superintendent, and we can't get anybody who can explain this to us. We've gone to our teachers, and we've asked them to please explain this to us, and please tell us why, when we used to be A students, now we're BC students. Can you tell us what we need to do, and can you tell us why this is happening? And they weren't getting any answers, and so they showed up at a PTO meeting on a lark and just said, parents, could you please help? So, because I had those grade distributions, it hadn't occurred to me to go and look at what this is doing to the high achieving students. So I went back and looked, and here we go. So again, you can see honors chemistry, if you go back 2011 to 2013, that was using the old grading system. And then 2014 was the first year that standards-based grading was in place. You can see that the number of A's has dropped almost in half. But also the number of failing grades has dropped. Not that there were a lot of failing grades in honors classes in the first place, but it dropped too. Same thing with AP biology, almost no kids. I think there were only 3 kids in the entire district who got an A in AP biology. Same thing in, oops, start it up again. Same thing happened in AP calculus. Same thing happens in Spanish. So this is not something that was just one department. This was across the entire district, across several buildings. So here's, you know, honors English, same thing. The A's dropped almost in half. The F's dropped too. Calculus, AP Spanish language, all of them. So this is just a quick representation, but it was everything. So what these kids were saying was not, they weren't making it up. But they weren't being taken seriously either. In fact, some of the things that were said to them is, you know, to me, I find incredibly insulting, is that they were treated like whiny honors kids who just weren't getting their A's. You know, you guys are just so used to being told that you're so great, maybe you're not as great as you think you are. And these are kids who work phenomenally hard. So really, you know, kind of in short, what we learned at the end of that first year is that the new system was doing great for the kids who don't do anything, and it was really hurting the kids on the high end. Yeah?
What do you attribute that to? The high end, the high achieving?
Yeah, I'll get to that right now. I asked the same question, like, well, how is it? Why is it that it's so lopsided in favor of kids that aren't doing something? So what we found is that typically good students have good habits. They do homework, they practice, they participate in class, they do their labs, they ask good questions, they're engaged. And typically in the more traditional system, those things also contribute to your grade. Maybe it shouldn't be everything in your grade, but there's more than just a test score. Kids are more than just a score. And in the past, we used to take that into account. So oftentimes, even a really great student doesn't get A's on every test. They just don't. I was a good student, but I'll tell you, most of my test scores were A's, sometimes B's. And when you do get those occasional B's, having other things feed into your grade, like your practice, your homework, your labs, your participation, those things help offset the fact that sometimes you're not going to be perfect. And you can still get an A in the class if you take those other things into consideration. But now that tests are 90% of the grade, that other stuff doesn't matter so much. And so it doesn't really impact the grade all that much. And so you have to really get A's on all of your tests in order to get an A in the class. That's what I think is happening. So, but then you get the administration saying, well, you know, if students aren't happy, they should go back and they should retake these tests. It sounds good. I mean, and I'm not opposed to kids going back and trying again. I offer that myself in my own classes. But I will tell you, most of these kids that were there and saying that we're having a problem with this, they are your high achieving kids who are taking 3, 4 AP classes. It's a very difficult workload in the first place. These are kids who are involved in sports. These are kids who are involved in communities things. There's kids who have jobs. And to tell these kids who already have a tremendous workload, well, now if you want to get that A, you got to come back and keep trying it again and make time for that. It sounds good, but it's not necessarily the most feasible thing, particularly because Morton did not have a way during the day for the kids to do that. And many kids were taking 0-hour classes already, so they couldn't even come in before school. So it made it very, very difficult for students who wanted to get that A, and a lot of them just said, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to take my B. And that's why we see kind of a growth in that B, C, D range and a drop in the A's. So without actually admitting that this was a problem, at the beginning of this school year, Morton took on another little aspect. They said, okay, well, we're seeing that kids are maybe skipping an awful lot of stuff that they shouldn't be, and they're passing. We're going to give them incompletes. And that, by the way, is something that is advocated by Doug Reeves. He's one of the people who's behind standards-based grading. He will tell you, and I sat in a meeting at our elementary district where he said, well, don't give zeros, give incompletes. And so Morton said, all right, we're going to give incompletes. We're not going to put in zeros for all those missing assignments. We'll just tell kids that they get an incomplete. Well, what does that mean? It means that every class has required content. So for example, in his English class, there might be a term paper that has to be done. You can't skip it. There's certain tests that you must do or must pass. You can't skip them. And if you don't, let's say you're absent on the day of a big test, you don't get a 0, you get an incomplete. But not just an incomplete for that assignment, you get an incomplete for the entire class. So what appears in the grade book, even though yesterday he may have had a B, if he was absent on the day of the test, tomorrow he has an incomplete. So, well, what does that mean? Students who have incompletes at the end of the semester get 6 more weeks to complete the work that they didn't do. Now think about this. You have a kid who maybe misses an assignment in February. You get to the end of the semester and they still haven't made it up. It's a mandatory assignment. You leave for summer break. That kid still has an incomplete. They don't have an F, they have an incomplete. They get 6 more weeks in the next term to make it up. That's into the next school year. That's October. So they miss an assignment in February, they can still make it up in October. And that teacher is obliged to not only give that assignment, but grade it. Or if it was a lab, set up that lab and let that kid do it a year from now, or 9 months from now. I mean, the insanity just goes on and on and on here. If, though, the kid does not do it by October or whenever it is, that 6-week mark, then that incomplete becomes an F. So finally, we can say, all right, you still haven't done this stuff, we're just going to now cave and give you that failing grade. So what I did again is what I always do, is I put in a FOIA and I just asked, you know, how's that working? So back in 2013, before they had this silly incomplete policy, 0.05% of the 8,000 grades, well, more than that, of 42,000 grades, so only 24 incompletes were given in 2013. Typically, just for those of you who aren't familiar, an incomplete is usually used when there's extreme circumstances. Like, for example, I have a student right now who's hospitalized. There's no way she's going to finish the work, for the last 6 weeks of school because she's not able. And it's not fair to put in zeros for her because she can't do the work at the moment, but she will. So we put in an incomplete, and later down the road, she'll make the stuff up, and I will grade the work and give her the grade that she deserves. That's typically what incompletes are used for. Or we had students whose parent was killed in a hit-and-run accident, and we said, you know what, it's not fair to make this kid try to come in and salvage their grades. We'll give you an incomplete until you're ready to do this. So it's rather unusual. This year, 2014, 5,505 incomplete grades out of 40,000 grades that were issued. And that's 5,505 assignments, tests, labs that teachers will have to do 6 weeks after the marking period is over, for whatever reason. So it's a huge number of kids that were not even given grades at the end of the semester because of this. We've got all this information, what have we done with it? We started this organization, the kids who showed up at that PTO meeting and we started this group called Morton PASS. It stands for Morton Parents Against Sinking Standards, because we do think that the standards have been lowered. We know the standards have been lowered. We spoke at board meetings. We've done public meetings kind of like this. We've done them in English and Spanish. These kids are phenomenal. I mean, ask a kid how to say standards-based grading in Spanish. It's amazing. I mean, these kids just, it was the one good thing that came out of all of this is that I felt as a parent, I'm so happy that my son gets to be around these kids because they are so impressive. The students staged a protest. They said, we've been talking to you administrators and telling you that this is hurting our grades, and you don't care. You haven't done anything about it. You haven't even taken us seriously. So they said, well, we're not going to take your grades seriously either. A year ago, we used to give the Prairie State Achievement Test. That's kind of gone by the wayside. We're giving Park Assessment this year. But it was a 2-day test, and the students said, on the second day, we're just going to put diamonds on day 2. We're going to just bubble in whatever on our test. And we're going to do that because day 2 doesn't really matter to us, but it sure does matter to the school district. That's a measure of how well you're meeting state standards. And you know what? If you don't care about us, we don't necessarily care about your grades either. I give those kids an awful lot of credit because that was very brave to do. I ran for the Board of Education. I was kind of tired of speaking to board members who kind of sat there stony-faced and don't ask questions or don't, take any of this seriously or even bother to try to understand it, to be truthful. So I ran for Board of Education. That's another story for another day, but there's a very interesting political climate in Cicero. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in Cicero, but a certain individual spent $20,000 on legal fees for objections to get me and 2 other candidates thrown off the ballot. And they did, because I didn't have $20,000 to spend on legal fees to combat that. So finally, my husband and I have had an opportunity to move out of the district. We're going. Our moving date is in 2 weeks. And we're going to a district where we feel that our kids are going to be challenged and that their hard work is going to be respected and that the standards are going to be high, because we want them high for every kid, not just for the high achievers, but for the struggling kids too. I'm kind of winding down here, and if other people want to chime in after I'm done here, I'm happy to try to answer questions. But, it sounds like a good idea, and I'm not opposed to everything that standards-based grading is trying to do. I want to get good information about what my kid knows. I think that's important. I think every parent deserves that. I think our community deserves that. But I will say, too, that there's not a lot of data about this making achievement better. I haven't seen it, and I've read extensively on this stuff. There's no data that suggests that this does improve communication or that parents can tell you more about what their child can do. A lot of anecdotal evidence, but that, not necessarily the best evidence. A lot of students and parents don't understand it. It's complicated. The grading system that they're using at Morton is so difficult to grade. If you wanted to calculate your child's grade by hand, my husband, the math teacher, took 7 pages to write out how you would calculate his grade in algebra, because there's so many weights and so many different things that factor into the grade. It's not like the old days where you pull out your calculator, you add it up and divide by the number of assignments. It doesn't work like that. Very complicated, hard to understand. Even teachers didn't understand it. We also found that there were fewer assignments put in the grade book, because let's be honest, if you're giving this homework and it's not worth much and you're considering it practice, a lot of teachers didn't even bother to put it in the grade book in the first place. So we wouldn't see any homework in there at all, and then suddenly he'd get a D on a test. And I'd say, hey, Andrew, why'd you get this D? And he'd say, I don't know. And I'd call the teacher and I'd say, why'd my kid get a D on this test? And he'd say, oh, he hasn't been doing homework. There's nothing in the grade book. So as a parent, I could have been intervening for weeks and kicking him in the pants and kicking him off the video games if I had known that he hadn't been doing his algebra homework. But I didn't know. So you also saw earlier on that sometimes standards aren't tested often enough. If you only test something one time, how can you really feel confident that a kid knows it or doesn't know it? So having repeated and multiple opportunities, it's not there, at least not at Morton. The grades are difficult to determine while in progress. I know that was an issue I heard raised by some of the kids in U-46, that they will only get a progress report, and that progress report will say something rather vague, like, well, you're getting somewhere between a B and a B+. But this wouldn't be something that they would get on a day-to-day basis. And me, as a parent, I'm on those kids like a tick on a dog. I want to know what they're doing every day, and if they ask me, can I go out on a Friday night, first thing I do is I check their grades to see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing in their daytime job. And oftentimes with standards-based grading, you can go weeks without feedback. And I will say, especially in a district this size, and I know Morton's in the same boat, when you have 4 buildings and you're trying to get a consensus across those 4 buildings about what proficient looks like, what needs improvement looks like, what below standards look like, that's hard. Especially when you don't have time to meet, especially when those teachers are flung across several buildings, especially when you have really large departments. You know, some of them have 40 teachers in the department. Coming up with a way for everybody to kind of understand this, very, very challenging. My advice, you know, for what it's worth, is there is a way to find the best of both. And I don't think you necessarily have to have one or the other. I think it is important to be able to get good feedback about what your kid is doing. I don't necessarily think you need to do it with a 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I don't necessarily think that holding the bar high at a 60% for minimum passing is necessarily a bad idea. I would also encourage schools to just reconsider this idea of basing everything on a test. That, you know, and that effort matters. I have a son, like I said, who's a struggling learner. He's a 3rd grader. It takes him an hour to do what it takes everybody else 10 minutes to do. He gets lots of grades that aren't phenomenal, but boy does that kid work. And boy do I want him to continue to work like that. Because I think if he ever stops, I'm afraid. I'm afraid for his future. We want kids to have good study habits. Don't excuse them from practice. When you tell kids homework doesn't count, or when you tell them if you don't do homework, you're going to get 5 points anyway, they're not stupid. They know that practice doesn't really matter, and they stop doing it. This guy, who we used to absolutely just lean on when he was in 8th grade, we made him do all this homework because it mattered, every single one of them. Now that he's in high school, he gets down and he says, hey mom, you know, I have to study for my AP Euro test, and that thing really counts, and I know I have algebra homework, but if I don't do it, it's not really going to affect my grade so much, so I'm really going to focus on this thing. How do you argue with that? I think too, schools need to find a way to recognize growth. One of the conversations that we had at the elementary district is that, let's say that you have a struggling learner who comes to school and they're a 4th grader, and they're reading at a 1st grade level. They're not able to master the 4th grade standards. They're not ready yet. But let's say that that kid makes tremendous growth over the course of that year, and by the end of that 4th grade year, they're reading at a 3rd grade level. That's tremendous. It really is. But they're still not mastering 4th grade standards. So if a teacher were going to mark them on the 4th grade standards, that kid is still a 1 across the board. And I haven't seen a way for districts that are using this to actually acknowledge the fact that kids are growing, but they may not still be at standard. Pilot programs, everybody talks about them, nobody does them. Morton didn't. District 100 is not planning on doing one. They're going to jump right into this in the fall. Even though the consultant, Doug Reeves, said, yeah, you should really have a pilot program. My kids have been the guinea pigs every single year. And every time something doesn't work, they make another change, and guess who's paying the price? Our kids. Somebody needs to think this through when it's not impacting kids. Particularly those kids that sat next to me at that PTO meeting, they said, you know what, we're juniors. We've been A students all along. All of a sudden, along comes this grading system, and now I'm not an A student, I'm a B or a C student. But if you look on my transcript, there's nothing on there that says, we went to standards-based grading, and it's harder to get an A. What it looks like to a college is this kid slacked off. And that hurts, because they're not slacking off, they're working hard. I would encourage you, I would encourage both of you as board members to listen to the students. The kids aren't whining. They're not just complaining because they don't have A's, they're complaining because sometimes things aren't fair and it does need attention. I think teachers need to be trained. You can't do that in one semester. You can't reach a consensus across several buildings with just a couple of morning meetings or having a consultant come once or twice and tell you how it's supposed to be. And then finally, I would strongly encourage you to put stuff like this in front of the Board of Education and put it up for a vote, because this is something that matters to your community. It reflects on your community. And these are the people, you know, among others, who were elected to do this job. And they should have a say as the elected officials on whether or not this goes forward. So that's my spiel. I'd be willing to take questions. Like I said, I'm not necessarily an expert on standards-based grading, just an expert on Morton crazy. Yeah.
I just want to say, I'm for full disclosure, I'm a teacher at U-46, and I want to say thank you for showing us the report cards I do, because I think that's something that we don't do well, is communicate to parents what's going on. And I think we're continually trying to make that better. So thank you so much for showing us that and explaining exactly how frustrating that is on your side, because my daughter's 6 months old. She doesn't get a report card yet. But I wanted to make a comment about the things that you said kind of were lacking. So like no changes to practice, no changes to their PLCs. They have to get all A's to get an A, and then no support in the day. So at Alton High School, we've been very fortunate that we have a testing center, we have full-day tutoring, we have time for our PLCs in the morning, we've made changes to our practice. It sounds like because that system wasn't in place, it couldn't be successful. But are you willing to say it could never be successful even when those supports are in place? Because I feel like we're really making strides to make it work.
You know, I heard that a lot, is that, you know, when I would talk about our experience with standards-based grading, they're like, oh, that's just Morton. Morton's doing it badly. But the funny thing that when I started kind of poking around out there and listening to what other schools are saying and what the responses are from kids at other schools, I was just shocked by how similar the conversations were, you know, that the students, the high-achieving students were saying, like, you know, here in U-46, they're saying this isn't working for us, and the high-achieving students at Morton's are saying this isn't working for us. So I'm wondering, is this bad implementation, or is this a function of standards-based grading as it is here? Yeah. That to me is a good question to ask, and it seems a logical question to ask.
So again, for full disclosure, I'm also fully implementing SVG at Alton High School, and I also teach the high-end kids in AP. And I think that what happened there, I can see that you're would be very angry. I'd be very angry if that was going on. But what I want people to understand is that is not the process that we are implementing or have implemented. We've had training, we develop rubrics, we work with the kids on those rubrics. When something doesn't work, we listen to them, what's going on. And I can tell you that my environmental science students do all of the fixing. I don't collect homework, we go over everything. If I do collect the homework, I give them copious notes. There's tons and tons of feedback, both in class and from me personally. Even though it doesn't count for their actual grade and what counts as their summatives, they're still turning in all that work to me, and we are going through that in class and talking about it because, quite frankly, that's what it is going to be like in college. I have 2 daughters in college, and actually I'm also a maroon mom, so my kids have gone through this SVG system as well and done very well. And so I just want to make sure that I clearly think that what you've shown here, and I haven't talked to the teachers at Morton, so I don't know, but what you've shown here is definitely not SVG. It's what they're calling it is not what it really is, and I just want to be clear that that's not the practice that we're developing here. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Sure. Would you say that your experience is commonplace across U-46? Would you say that other teachers are having the same level of success that you feel? I don't know.
And we meet in our PLC, so I go on to 3 PLCs. I think one of the things that people don't understand about SVG is it's not so much about getting a grade as it is about a reflective teaching practice. And so you start with the standards, you develop the standards that are these are my sticking points, these are the things that kids have to know before they leave us. We start with that, and then again, as a team, we sit down, we look at each of them, we develop I can statements, we develop the objectives, we develop the 4, 3, 2, 1. What does it look like? What's the assessment going to look like? We develop the assessment, we do backward design, we develop all the formative assessments, and so all of those things are all rolled in weeks before we even do it with the kids. And then after we do it with the kids, we're meeting again to say what worked, what didn't, what was it, what do we need to change? This question wasn't good, it didn't get what we wanted. It's a very standardized process. It's more about being a reflective teaching, developing reflective practice, working with students. That's what standard-based grading is. What you've shown us is not standard-based grading, and I can totally understand why you're upset with that. But that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're being trained to do. That's not what we're working to do, and I just want to be clear on that.
I'd like to make a follow-up comment to that, because it seems to me that perhaps it's being differently implemented across the district. It might be different at Elgin than it is at some of the other schools, because I asked for some feedback from a few of those kids who came to the board and said, hey, these are the high-performing kids. We can't get A's even though we're working very hard. We can't get 4s even though we're working very hard. And I received permission to anonymously read this person's comments. I'm going to read it now. She says, SPG was covered up for a while but never completely got fixed. I hear students every day struggle with this system because it's still incredibly difficult to get an A or 4. Quizzes don't mean anything because students just reassess on the unit test, so many don't care about quizzes, myself included. Many students take the chance and reassess on unit tests to get a lower grade than what they got in the first place. Homework doesn't count, so many students don't do it, which causes us to lose practice. I know many students who don't care about the unit tests if they have too much going on because they can reassess at a later date and get more time to study. I have overheard many teachers that don't completely understand or completely dislike it. Overall, SPG has had a very unsuccessful year and doesn't seem to be able to ever improve.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. The rollout has not been good, but you cannot master this in a year. I'm sure you would agree, any of the research that's out there, it takes 3 to 5 years to master any practice, including when you're starting a new curriculum. And that's just the way it is. It doesn't matter, when I first started teaching AP, they said you're going to teach AP Environmental. I wasn't good at it until the 3rd or 5th year, between then. So the rollout has not been good. That's been something that we have all shared openly. That is not an argument at all, and I would say that across the district it's not. I know that we have a great educational leader. We've been jumping on this. This is actually my 3rd year in bio and my 1st year in AP. We've had tons of training. We've had tons of PLC time. We have changed our policies. We've had a big evolution in terms of, you know what, that policy didn't work. We addressed the whole I'm not doing homework thing. And now we have different policies in place. So it is a thing that's going to take time. And I would argue that, this is my 24th year as a teacher, 21st in this district. So I've been here a long time. Prior to SBG, it was shameful what I would tell parents in conferences when they would ask me what their kid needed to do, what an 80% meant. That's not a lie. That's not a fib. You cannot, when I say it's an 80% and the kid, okay, so if I say your kid is above average, I want my kid to be outstanding. Well, how do you do that? You cannot in the traditional system do that. You have to have the rubrics, you have to have the conversation as professionals. What are the skills that we need and what are the levels that they need? Then I can have that conversation with the parents, and better yet, I do student-led conferences, and this year was the first year it actually worked well with standard-based grading, because the kids had them all out in front of them, and they told their kid, it was magical. They told the kids that were there, they told their parents what they could do and couldn't do, what they needed help with. I even had parents saying things like, oh, well, we could probably find some stuff on the internet to help, and I said, well, I have some stuff to help you with that. So it's not bad. It's been implemented poorly. There's no question. We need to get on that and get that fixed, because and I invite you guys, you can come see my classroom, you can talk to my kids. I'm doing trainings all over the district. You guys are more than welcome to come and see those. I get upset when we get part of the story, on either end.
So, the first thing is, I'm not opposed to standards-based grading, and I'm going to direct it towards you a little bit, because I am excited to see something like what Elgin has implemented, and we're not seeing that.
Right.
My daughter is experiencing this.
I agree.
And that's where it becomes really frustrating for all of us, because we keep hearing how well you guys have implemented at Elgin, and we're not seeing it, and that's killing us, because my daughter she's gaming the system, and we have the same problem that you had, where we don't even see grades being entered into the Infinite Campus, and then all of a sudden she gets a B or a C on a test, and we don't understand why. So we're doing the same thing she had to do, where you email or you call or you do a face-to-face with the teachers. So my question to everybody here who has some say in this matter, when is every other school going to catch up to what you're doing and have been doing for, what, 3 years?
Yeah,
And I agree, it takes 3 to 5 years, so why didn't, I know the answer to this, but why didn't the school district do a trial or whatever word you want to use here?
And I don't know that we can answer that for you, but what I would like to say is that then we need to do positive things that we can do to make sure that it happens. We can't have this complete disparity. We can't do that anymore. So we have to all make sure that it happens, instead of going whisper over here, whisper over there. We have to make sure that it happens. And the only way that happens is that if all of us move forward in one direction instead of splitting into subgroups, which is what we're doing.
The problem, I think, there, and I know you have something to say, Lisa, sorry. The parents aren't seeing standards-based grading as a positive, even though it may be. And I agree, there should be standards that they're taught to, but they're not seeing it as a positive because they don't fully understand it, because the teachers don't fully understand it and can't explain it. And there's no way that a teacher in another school other than Elgin could do student-led meetings, because the kids don't get it. They don't.
Well, I know Tech does. I know Tech does student-led, and they do a really good job with standards. So there are groups, and I don't know if Jared.
Yeah, and I can't speak to Tech. I mean, my kid doesn't go to Tech.
I mean, there are examples. I know, Larson Middle School. There are places that are doing it because we work with them. Yeah, there are places. There are a lot of places that are doing it and have great people in place doing it, more than you think.
I think Lisa is next.
Well, I can appreciate Deb being here from Elgin High, but as a parent, I'm not an educator, I'm a parent, I can say that South Elgin is well on its way to meeting up right on the same level with Elgin High. Larkin too. Now, this year we had early release days. A lot of complaints about early release days. One day every 2 weeks, our kids are released about an hour and 10 minutes early. If they have to wait for a bus, there's supervised tutoring, there's library time, there's guidance counselors time. That is the time when our departments got together and collaborated, looked at their assessments, looked at how they were looking at the standards, and I had a couple of teachers email me with updates after every single one of those collaborative meetings. And yet we have parents that are complaining because of loss of instruction time. This has been an amazing year for us. My daughter is a recent graduate. There was absolutely no change in her grades whatsoever. We have some letter, it's stupid. It's a letter that goes with the transcripts to the colleges. I say stupid because honestly, it's not needed. Our transcripts show a letter grade. It doesn't show how it got that letter grade. There's no pluses, no minuses, never have been. My daughter applied to all her colleges in time for early admission before the letter was included, and there was never a question of who had standards-based grading. Were you 0 to 5? Were you 1 to 4? I have two other questions real quick because while I was waiting, sorry.
She does that.
As a mom, because I don't understand acronyms like PLCs and stuff like that, I'm not understanding how data is matching up with what you're saying. You're saying that your school started standards-based grading to help graduate more students, yet they initiated this at 69% graduation rate, but after all the charts and all the you're saying less failures, you're still only graduating 70%. So I don't really understand that at all.
It's been in play for 1 year. So there are kids who are already behind in graduation credits, long behind in graduation credits, who are still going to continue to be. I would say you'll probably need about a 4-year longitudinal before you're going to see this grow.
Well, if you're behind on graduation credits, doesn't that mean you're failing? I don't understand.
Meaning they were behind on credits.
Or no?
They were behind on credits before standards-based grading ever existed in the district. So there's kids who were sophomores, let's say, who were already behind 2, 3, 4 credits, who are not going to graduate on time, even with standards-based grading in place.
So it hasn't really changed anything.
Yeah.
Because especially since your school doesn't have any real opportunity for kids to make up credits.
Without paying money.
Without paying money. I can totally understand that. But if you're getting rid of grade inflation and you're giving kids multiple opportunities to show what they know, I mean, because isn't that our goal, is we want our kids to finish class knowing something. Wouldn't you expect less A's, less F's? Because you got rid of grade inflation. And
I think that's kind of a bold assumption that there was grade inflation. No, I really do. I mean, what's the evidence that there was?
Well, honestly, homework is grade inflation, okay? Because...
Oh, Lisa, but didn't you actually say that some kids, or even yourself, like you're not perfect. And I don't think it's an issue of being perfection. You say you don't always get A's on things. You do get some B's. But then we should take into account non-learning issues like effort.
Who said that a student's work in class is non-academic or that should not be considered? I think honestly in education we see pendula swing both ways.
Absolutely. But
and I think we've kind of swung really far on this side of it's the test that matters, and let's not consider some of these other
you probably have to be in the middle.
Things.
But the issue of isn't that boosting a grade? If the student has demonstrated a proficient understanding of something, and you take something else and factor that in to boost the grade.
Like a student's verbal response in class that indicates an understanding, even if it's a formative. I think that is a good indicator that a kid gets it.
That's all alternative assessment. That's all that is. That's alternative assessment.
I mean, call it what you will, but really when you look at the scheme that they're using, and I don't even know how you guys are sorting out your 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, but...
Yeah, I'm sorry not to interrupt you, but you asked the question, is it SVG inherently or is it implementation? And from what you rolled out, I would say 100% it's implementation. Like if you did anything tonight, you confirmed to me, like don't move the Morton School District. Because one of the biggest flaws they have in their system, and you may want to tell them this, is they're moneying it. You can't average grades in SVG. It's inherently contradictory. Because if you're basing, they show proficiency or whatever their levels of proficiency their markers are, you can't then average scores. That's an inherent flaw. We actually see that. We have a problem in our building right now, even though people think we're doing such a great job. People who are doing this marks thing where they put the grades in, because you do have those incremental units there of the grades at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A 0 doesn't have the impact it used to have. And it's driving teachers crazy. But if you take into account SVG and you say, hey, this is the benchmark, and this is what you're supposed to be able to do, then those zeros play a factor. There's no evidence. You cannot show me that you've been able to meet that level. As soon as you start averaging grades, then absolutely. Then it's flawed.
I'd like to share another consistency comment that I received from a teacher with permission to share anonymously. I am a 20-year veteran teacher within the district, that's within U-46. I am firmly against both SPG and the 4-point marks scale we are currently using. I'm not currently using SPG as a grading scale, I am using marks. On an institute day, I was excited to sit down with all the teachers in my area of specialty in the district to discuss how teachers implement SPG. I came out of that meeting rather dismayed. Most departments that have implemented SPG in my department have been given no direction from administration on how the grading works in our area of expertise. Departments are interpreting the grading policy individually per school. There is no consistency within the district across departments. We sat in that meeting and discussed testing, final assessments, and if it is appropriate to fail students if they miss one assessment. Rubrics staff have created at each school are not consistent with all schools in our district. I don't believe we are asking for quality work from our students. Instead, we are looking to graduate as many as possible with no consideration for college or work readiness. I ask that School District U-46 not implement this grading system next year and that we return to a traditional grading scale. I have used the U-46 grading system marks. This 4-point scale also needs to be eliminated. It allows all students to pass with little or no effort on their part. For example, I have a student that transferred into the district on April 1st, week 10 of their semester grade. This particular student was not enrolled in my area of specialty and was not enrolled in a class that would transfer in a grade in progress. Normally this would be an audit grade. Under marks, giving zeros for 10 weeks on all work assignments and tests, this student is currently passing my class. This grading policy is rewarding students who just show up with passing grades. Again, on paper, it appears we're making progress, showing a significant number of our students are successfully passing. Our mission is work and college readiness without remediation. I don't think we are preparing our students for either with our current grading practices of either SPG or marks. So I think that speaks to the fact that
Is all of your contributions to
Let me
the
finish,
anonymous
please.
letters?
I will speak up. I've been raising my hand for a while. I am a teacher at Berwyn High School. I am also a parent of a student at Canyon Woods Middle School, and I have had much experience with this. As a teacher at Berwyn High School, I am doing my best. I am doing a mark system as well, because that's the training that I have. That's the most comfortable that I can be with it. I'm also trying to implement standards-based grading to the best of my ability, but from the beginning of the year on to now, I have had very little help, support, people showing me what to do. So I am doing the best I can on my own. As a parent of a daughter at Canyon Woods, they are strictly marks. I see that the only way for her to get an A in her classes is to get a 3.51 to a 4. That is a 0.49 range, and that is the only way she can receive an A in a course. So I can pull up her Infinite Campus on my phone here. I can show you all of her grades, everything like that. I understand it. I'm an educated person. I get it. But if she even gets 1-3 on something, because there's very few grades, for a 7th grader, a 13-year-old, that is a B, and that's the way it goes. So while I totally appreciate what Elgin High School is doing, I do not feel that the entire district is doing that, nor do I feel it is fair to all the students. Teachers are doing the best that we can. Please do not think that I'm doing a bad job, the Berwyn High School is doing a bad job, anything like that. But we are not at that point, nor do I foresee that we will be at that point for a long time coming. And so when we are saying standards-based grading is awesome, standards-based grading, I agree, standards-based grading could be awesome. Is what District U-46 doing in all of their schools awesome? Absolutely not.
Hey, you gotta get a balloon?
I sure do, but again,
I'll come over anytime. I'll bring myself. I'll help you out.
you can come and help, but You can't be there every single day to write every single assessment that I have, for every single rubric, for every project. For my honors,
You
I
can't
do
do
honors
that for every
and
teacher
AP.
in the district.
But I'll help you, so just.
For honors, understood. For honors and AP kids to come up to me and want to know, well, why is this, and why is this, and why is this? And then we go to trainings and we're told, well, you're the educator, you make the best guess because you're the educator on that. That puts me in a weird situation to have to make calls like that. And so, sure, Deb, I will get in touch with you, but again, unless you can be there with me every day,
You won't need me.
writing my stuff and providing the time and energy for it, it's very difficult. So, again, standards-based grading, I think it's great, not how it's currently happening in every school.
And have you had to give a lesser grade? If you had a kid that you knew deserved an A, have you let them walk out of your classroom without that A? Or have you examined your assessments and the way you're grading, or looked at them and said you need to take some retakes, or
Based
do
off
you
of the
let a kid
information,
walk out without a grade they deserve?
based off of the information that I have, I can give them the best grade that I can. I personally adjust A's because that's as a parent, and I've seen 3.51 to 4.0 was very difficult. I have adjusted A's. That's all that I do, because once I start adjusting some people's grades, then I'm not adjusting everyone's grades, and then I get challenges from here and there. And so you can look back at my semester grades, I've adjusted A's. That's all.
Mr. Holt, Mrs. Ward, public education, especially in a large school district, is not perfect. At all. I mean, there's flaws in everything. The reason why Elgin High School has had a chance to kind of do a little bit better of a job is because we committed the time and the resources to it. As the speaker here said earlier, at Morton, when teachers don't have time, they don't have a chance to collaborate, they can't meet, it's impossible. It's impossible for SVG to really be done effectively if teachers don't have frequent opportunities throughout the day or the week. At Elgin High School, it's an hour every Tuesday where they need to work together and collaborate. Time is of the essence for educators, and they're very busy. They have a lot of things that are going on at different times, but to create any type of improvement in any system, whether it's an SVG system or a traditional system, you have to allow them to have that time to make those improvements. And so what I would ask you to do as board members is lobby for a late start or early release that's built into the schedule for all teachers in the district. Not just Elgin High School because we push for it, but every school. Because then they can have those very good conversations where they can help each other and do the planning, because one person can't do it all for their classroom. That's what I told my teachers the whole time, that you cannot do it yourself. You have to work as a team. When you work as a team, you have the time, and amazing things happen.
Hi, I'm a teacher at Berwyn High School as well, and I totally agree that the collaboration time is important. We just implemented PLC time in the last, we've had like 6 sessions at most, maybe 4. And during that time, we've had the collaboration time, but we haven't had any direction as far as what to do. If we were to do standards-based, it's just been time to meet. It hasn't been really useful in providing standards-based grading. Now, my understanding too is with standards-based grading that the set standards and the set standards were put into the grade books. But as a math teacher, when I see students can prove theorems geometrically, what does that mean to me as one geometry teacher versus another geometry teacher versus another one? Shouldn't that be standardized, and what is the level for meeting that standard at a 4, 3, 2, 1? What is that scale? And that's never been broken down, that's never been answered. And it should be. I mean, it sounds like you have a great system, and I know Elgin, they were the pilot for this, they were targeted for this, and they worked on this together, but none of the other high schools have been encouraged like you guys have. And none of, whatever resources you've been given, they're absent, at least at our school. I can't speak to the other schools because I'm not there. So again, I've known Miss
Julie.
No.
Okay. I've worked with this Streamwood teacher for 20 years, and my students' grades reflect exactly what the lady had showed up on the screen. That a student, you know, I'm using the mark system because I wasn't going, Common Core is a big enough challenge in mathematics right now. We need to tackle that and get comfortable with that first to find out what we're going to do next. So it's kind of like, okay, which piece are you going to take? And Common Core state standard is there. That's what you have to teach to. Teaching has to become first for our students to you know, move forward. You know, NCTM's Principles to Action puts effective teaching as primary. And so whatever scale system you come up with, you know, that's going to affect the student's grade, but what affects the student most is effective teaching. And how we are given professional time to do that is important. But when you're giving no direction and said, let's implement this, but you continually try to refine and find out what's happened. I know I attended a standard-based grading session almost a year ago, and Elgin had said that in their system, when they did the pilot, 2 was passing, not a 1.
Right.
Nothing under 2 was passing. Now, the district did not stand by that when they implemented the system. So I have students that are passing at a 0.55 or a 0.6. They get a D.
But didn't it also change? Like, because I spoke with Suzanne Johnson, and she said at first it was a 2, and then it got up to like a 2.4 or something, which I think was like 60% of 4, or something like that. And I thought, that's kind of weird.
But the district didn't, how things were piloted is not how things were implemented. And so that's a problem, because I have students that have told me, I don't have to do any homework. You know, it's 20% of my grade, and it's a formative assessment and as well as any quizzes. So they ask me, hey, is this formative or summative? Because they know how seriously they have to take it. If it's formative, they could care less. You know, oh, if I do well, who cares? If I don't do it, who cares? What I care about is doing well on the test. If that means wandering eyes, that you know, there's more chance because it's the high stakes testing. You know, how well does a student do in the class all depends on that test. If they have one really good test, the rest might fall by the wayside, and then you have to say, okay, well, what did they do? It comes out to 0.58. And then you can make a judgment call. I mean, I made it, like, this teacher made a judgment call for A's, I made a judgment call for E's. I had a student who had a 0.52. According to the district, that was passing. I did not mark that as passing.
So, as a business person, I don't have any educational background except being educated. I have 3 degrees. So I've been through the education system a lot. What this sounds like is a classic change management failure. You had a pilot, it's a good pilot, it's intelligent, it's working, and then the rollout didn't happen. It sounds like there was a breakdown somewhere in the rollout from the pilot and the resources that are focused on it out. So maybe what the board can consider, the board members can consider, is that, is it an assessment of the rollout to the schools, the resources that are applied, and the manner that is being rolled out? You need to stop in some schools and go back to where people are familiar with and tell you to correct and roll it out in a manner that can work for the other schools. But it sounds like a change management issue.
And I would agree with that only from the point of view as a parent, that it's equitable and fair to kids. Because if you're still struggling with how to get this to work well, in meantime you're assigning grades to kids that matter a lot for them to go to college or get a scholarship or to pass,
And when
they deserve to have it done right.
Right, when you talk about that time period, change management happens in business too. There's always a struggle where you have that change management time period. You have to measure the metrics to make sure you're not failing, because in business you lose revenue, you lose clients, you lose, you know, your momentum, and you can lose your business. In schools, what you lose is the children, and that's the hard part, because if you have a 3-4 year implementation and you're taking kids through that, and it's not clear, it's unclear in how it's being done, you've lost a generation, a graduating class.
And credibility for the quality of the education that you're providing.
Or for SBG in general.
There was a question in that background.
I just wanted to say that nobody has recognized that the district did put the brakes on it. And so it is a teacher option. When Tony came on board, he heard what was happening and how we were feeling. And so we were able to take this year and try to figure out what are we doing. There is lots of training that has gone through out the school year and will continue this summer. I'm still on marks. I'm special ed. I'm not ready to make that jump. I don't know how to make that jump. And so I need to be informed. I need to be a consumer and go to the training and figure it out. But the district is offering lots of training for us this summer.
Did you say something else?
Yeah, well, one question I was when you were talking about the testing now with SPG, the grading is more weighted toward the test. And as we're moving toward Park and everything else, it sounds like SPG is making even more so now, more and more high stakes testing, where the testing is all based, grades are based off the testing more than anything else. Just if you want to expand on that a little bit more, how that's...
As I said about the pendulum swinging, that we spend a lot of time testing our kids, whether it's standardized testing or in the classroom or whatever. And honestly, as a parent, as a professional, my feeling is we may have swung too far this way. That perhaps there's a happier medium where we're not fluffing grades for just kids that show up or, they did their homework and I like that kid, he's a good kid. We'll just, we'll give him a grade because of that. Or we give a kid a grade because, these literally in some classes, 3 tests determine 90% of his grade, 3. And when you're there for 18 weeks, to me, it just seems like, what are you doing the rest of the time when you're not testing if it doesn't really get reflected somehow? So I think there's probably a happier medium, but this isn't it. So.
If you have a follow-up comment?
Me.
So, again, as a mom, I'm learning the vocabulary and assessments. It's not a sit-down, write test. My kid did foreign language. There were several types of assessments. She made the old glitter poster. She had to stand up and do a speech in French. She had to write a letter to a pen pal in French. Those were all summative assessments. I don't see where the problem is with that.
The person next to you, I don't know her name.
Oh, my name is Heather Fellows.
Okay.
So, one, just to build on that, I think that's part of it too, is that there's this problem with considering things like a test. We have a standard about following lab procedures, so part of my assessment is when you do a lab, how many times you ask for help is your grade on how you can follow lab procedures. So they have to prep the lab beforehand and do the lab, and so the assessments themselves feel very different. And my challenge as well to that statement about 3 tests determining the whole grade, if I'm getting ready to go to college and I'm a junior, senior, then 2 tests determining my grade for a whole semester is more accurate for a college class, because that was how my psych grade was in college. So, and that's off topic, and I don't mean to be aggressive with that, but I feel like that statement we need to consider if we are making kids college ready, that what college looks like can be very much 2 tests and done. I want to go back to your data though, because my question is this. Those incompletes, how many of those turned into failures? And once they turned into failures, did that make your data look more like previous years? So are we, with that incomplete setup, are they catching the kids that then just didn't do any work? Do you know what I mean? Like, does it re-catch those kids and make that data look more like it did previous years? And follow-up, I think you've also made the point that getting rid of the D in these systems is a strong solution. And or at least it comes with that. Is that not you? That's part of discussions you've been a part of, I think. And so I've seen that as well. And so maybe if you thought about that, like getting rid of the D, or if we didn't allow Ds to be passing grades, which I know some of CPS doesn't do, Chicago Public Schools, suppose. I think that's also a way to fix some of these problems where you're concerned about passing kids. I would love to see a D not be a passing grade. I feel like my kids need that bar set higher occasionally. And I just wonder, but the data maybe you can speak to, just whether those incompletes ended up normalizing.
Right, so it's too early to tell.
Okay.
because this is the first year that it's been put into play, and we've only had one semester completed.
Okay, but the 6 weeks after that semester.
The 6 weeks after that, right, I need to put in another FOIA.
Okay.
Is what needs to happen,
Yeah,
because no one will volunteer that information, trust me. Nobody wants me to know what's going on there, and I will have to, you know, put in my letters and wait my...
Before we go on, maybe people need a bio break, that's one thought. And secondly, also, this town hall is for other topics too. If you have other things you want to discuss, the floor is now open for other things besides SBG that you'd like to bring to the attention of board members, Cody, Holt, and Jeanette Ward. Go ahead, David.
So, and once again, I'm going to direct it up here a little bit more because you're the experts. Accept it. I'm not. My understanding of standards-based grading is you have standards that you have set forth and you're grading to those standards. And the funny thing that I'm seeing is there's no standard whatsoever here. The way that Elgin does it is completely not standard to the way that Streamwood does it, which is not standard to any other school. So not being involved as board members should be and as teachers and administrators should be. The question I have is, what is really being done to standardize? And not just within our district, but my understanding of standards-based grading, and the whole point that it was pushed so hard with Common Core and everything else is because it creates a standard nationwide. And
Yeah, so
statewide
I think
well.
nationwide, I think that's because, you know, Gusky and Wormley and all of them want to line their pockets differently. And
I
so
understand.
they don't want to have, I mean, having one system right eliminates the need for 3 of those consultants.
But you keep hearing, a
Yeah.
kid in Illinois learns what a kid in Colorado
Yeah,
learns
the
what a kid
standards are
learns.
the same.
The standards are the same.
That's Common Core.
I understand,
Common
which
Core is
also,
different than
also
standards-based
relates
grading.
to standards-based grading.
So let me talk about the science standards, which is what I am familiar with. And we use Common Core, the next generation science standards are based on Common Core, so they're built into them. When I went to the National Science Teachers Conference and heard a presentation on standard-based grading, it was amazing to hear that the gentleman who was doing standards-based grading had come to the same organization of his grade book as we had at Elgin High. I've never talked to this man, I'd never been on any of the websites that he'd been on. We organized our grade book exactly the same way around the practices and around the standards. He was teaching in his class the same biology standards that I am teaching. Now, would it, in an ideal world, would his 4-3-2-1 look exactly like my 4-3-2-1? Yes. But if you ever look at the next generation science standards, they are dense. The same with the Common Core. You've got 50 things to teach in one paragraph, and it is just really complex. However, I will tell you that he had a standard based on heredity, and he had a standard based on energy, and he had a standard based on science practices, and those things were consistent. So that a student from, somewhere where you can help me with stars, I want to say it was Idaho, but I want to say that what he was doing was so similar to us, and we had come to it both very differently. That's the strength of this, is when we truly are using the standards and organizing our grade book around them and really thinking about it, it will be.
So,
Can I add to that? Can I just add one thing? I'm sorry.
absolutely.
So what I would want to add to that is, what I want people to remember is that SBG is an organic process. It is not a system to assign a grade. A grade is the outcome, but it's really this process of being in your PLC, and I belong to 3 PLCs. In one PLC, there's 8 of us, in our biology one. In the environmental science one, there's 2 of us, and we don't even teach the same exact topics. Because I'm AP and she's regular. And then I'm in the Gifted Academy PLC, which everyone who teaches any gifted class, so none of us teach the same thing. So we're in these different PLC groups, but we're all talking about the policies, we're all talking about the standard, we're all talking about the rubric, we're all talking about the assessment. And so within those groups, you have standardization because you're talking and agreeing on what you want to what level, what's it gonna look like, how are we gonna do it. Does that mean that what we come to at Elgin in the biology department will be exactly the same as what it is in Stream 1? And it may or may not be able to be similar. However, the beauty in that is our kids at Elgin aren't like any other kid in this district. And the kids at Streamwood aren't like any other kid in the district. We're making those decisions based on who we have in that class here, now, then. And we're doing what they need, when they need it.
No SPG then.
I'm sorry.
Because kids in Texas aren't the same as kids in Illinois who aren't the same.
They are, because it's the same standards.
Oh, I think she means more interventions and.
Right, I mean
I'm
the
saying
organic process.
okay,
Yeah.
keep me interrupted. I'm saying, how can AP, whatever you teach, not be the same standards in Elgin or sorry, Larkin or Stream?
They are the same, I apologize. They are the
The
same, but
standards.
the process of how we get to those standards might be slightly different. I don't want you to think it's standards because we're all different people in these planning groups, but the standards are exactly the same across the nation.
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple other things waiting for years, waiting for decisions to come down from the district on whether or not we can have books or do things. So I think there's some play there with why it doesn't look more standardized, because there's some big district decisions that haven't been.
So, and to go back to, I know, but hold on. Go back to the comment made about Tony Sanders, where he put the brakes on this. It doesn't seem that the brakes were really put on. It was more of a, hey, we're not going to roll this out as a whole district. You guys just grade however you feel. So if we're really going to take this SPG serious, then we need to first, I think somebody should provide some information to the parents saying, this is what it does, what it can do, how it affects your kids. Here's the grading, everything else. Do some mock-ups, show us how it really is beneficial, none of which was done. And then do the pilots like you guys have done in Elgin and get it really going and get people involved. And I know you're teachers and I know it's not up to you to do it, but I'm saying it on video so hopefully somebody can watch this and get that.
Let's give this gentleman a chance to have a say.
What I don't understand is, mathematically, the kids don't have to do crap besides pass a couple tests. So how is it that, I understand that the way the system works is supposed to help you teachers be able to help the students better. I understand that. But at the same note, you can't force the kids to do anything, and they can just do nothing and still pass the class. I don't understand how you get past that.
Because what we're talking, actually what you and I are talking about are two completely different things. What you saw is not standard-based grading. They were averaging a bunch of grades together, and that definitely leads to kids doing things that they're not going to pass.
She pulled up a report card and started, all right, you didn't do this.
Because she's not doing what we're doing.
But that is equivalent to our 0 to 4 scale for
doing
grading
it.
in marks. That is
You guys are
exactly
working
what it
differently.
looks like in U-46 unless you are grading in standards-based.
Right, yes.
So both systems are occurring here. They
Right.
could occur in the same building. You might have a student who has some teachers that grade standards-based grading and some in the 0 to 4.
And that is why we don't do marks.
But when you get to what we're doing and on rubrics, that doesn't happen. There is not a kid that I'm guessing that has even 1-1. They can't have any ones and pass. They have to, and in order to pass the test, pass our summative assessments, they have to complete 80% of the formative work. We don't assign the summative assessments until we've done enough of that formative, we've given them enough feedback, and we know that they're ready for that summative assessment. If they fail the summative assessment, now we have different policy in place. They have to do interventions, they have to complete all their work, they have to run through a whole bunch of steps before they can do that retake. We let them do the retake, which is a different one. If they demonstrate that they can learn the information then we give that to them. So what's happening is kind of what Mr. Marsh was saying. Unfortunately, if you cannot do standard-based grading, is not meant to be under marks. We have different, I mean, and actually, I don't make it sound like we're the only ones that are doing this. Actually, there's been great rollout across the district in different places and different pockets. But the problem is SPG, and I can tell you because we used to have to do it, because we were the pilot, we had to do SPG under marks.
And it felt gross.
And it felt exactly
It
like
felt
what you're saying.
exactly
We were like,
what
wow, you know, we were exactly there. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Here's the next thing. All right, all kids don't learn the same.
Right.
So having one set of standards for me did not work. I had to sue the school district and go get a real education somewhere else. So how does this one set standard that you guys all have to implement for every student be able to be flexible enough to adjust to the
You
needs of
would
each
love to
student.
be in our school right now.
Oh my gosh, it would suit you way better, because I have a student who cannot, on a test, always show me that they understand the material. But when I have a conversation with that student, he nails it. He nails it every time. And so whenever he can't show me on the written assessment, we have a talk. And I say, guess what? You met the standard because we wrote a rubric as a PLC of what he needs to be able to explain. Now, is his science writing practice grade good? No, it is not, because he still has to be held accountable for writing at some point. But his knowledge about this content, I can give him a 4. No, I can't. I'm gonna give him a 1 for writing because he can't write. I love the kid, but he can't write. So, but that's where the system succeeds, is because I don't have to punish a different kid because he can't show me the same way.
And you would be doing all these different formatives, it would be giving you information, and that's how we talk about it. If this formative assessment, this activity that we're doing, this quiz that we're doing, if you did this today, what would be your grade? Do you know this information? Are you ready for the summative assessment? And the kids, metacognitively, can look at that and say to us, I'm not ready.
Yeah,
I'm not ready for that. Okay, well, if you need extra practice, I've got this set up, I've got this video on our Google Chat classroom, we've got all this other stuff in place, and you as a teacher, I'm getting that information, I'm literally going home with that, whatever it is, formative, and I'm making piles, can do it, can't do it, can do it, can do it, can really do it, I'm making these different piles, and the next day, I'm differentiating. I'm changing what's going on in the classroom based on who can and who can't, and then when I feel like the majority of them can do that summative assessment, and they're ready for that summative assessment, then I'm giving it to them. And if they still don't do it, we've got a ton of interventions. And honestly, part of the reason we're so successful is the man who left the room. I mean, he's making sure it's happening, and he listens to us, and I would say that we put 50 hours alone into just policy, evolution, adaptation, and change. It's a completely systemic thing that we're doing. It's not just at Elgin High, it is occurring at other places. And I think that the rollout has been terrible. I know that there's teachers upset about it. I know there's parents upset about it. You should be upset about it. I'm upset about it. But if we can move forward and have everyone go, wow, this is going to be the right, do we not need to change the district? Are there not things that we need to do? It's for the benefit of our kids, for the benefit of our staff, to make all of us better, the betterment of our community. Was what we were doing under the traditional system, was any of the teaching we were doing under the old system working for anyone? I would argue no. So then we got to do something.
I'm sure it was working for a few people.
Right, but is that the point, to work for a few people or to work
It
for
worked for
everyone?
me. I mean, I'm a product of U-46.
Well, I'm just saying that for the kids that were coming in my classroom, school was not necessarily working. Now we're getting a system in place that's actually going to work, and I teach the upper kids. Okay, I teach those upper kids. Now we're going to create a system that's well implemented, that's well supported, that's going to work for a lot more people.
What I heard you saying though too is you've raised the level of expectation of the student drastically. And that has happened at your school where the opposite has happened at other schools.
Because of the marks, yes, absolutely.
And
And
so
it was there for us.
And so that, I mean, again, you raise that level, they're gonna come up to it.
That's right.
Okay, I would like to let everyone know there's 50 more minutes before we need to vacate this room. So does anyone have anything new to share that hasn't already been shared? So I don't want to rehash what was already said, but if there's something that you didn't get to say, please say it. Yes, Julie.
Well, again, listening from a business perspective, it sounds like we have a big defense of some of the standard-based grading. I think in general, though, what I don't understand, because I'm not involved in it, is standard-based grading across the country? Is it being adopted? Is it being accepted? Is it being vetted? Is it getting the results that we, had hoped it would do? The second is Common Core is in struggle across the country. Many states who have implemented it are now backed off of it, so we know that there's some issues there. It is, maybe, I don't envy the board's position because you have to think through all these things, and if this gentleman is a best practice gentleman that has put this through with these teachers, then maybe that's a person the board needs to be communicating with. And if you have to hire a professional change manager in order to roll this out, or however that should work within the district, I think it's obvious that if you first answer the question that standard-based grading is acceptable, should be implemented, you know, across the country in whatever manner, then how do you implement it and get it to the point where it does get the results? These teachers are experiencing the good side, other teachers are experiencing the downside of this, and then, you know, how do you go forward from that? I mean, it sounds just like a massive change management issue. But validation of the data, you know, initially, and even a common core, I mean, that is a struggle that the entire country is going through right now. Don't have any excuses.
Okay. And if anyone has any other topic they'd like to discuss with us, you can call us or come down and talk to us privately, but I think for now we'll close this town hall.
Thank you.
Thank you.